Hey, everybody, what's going on? It is James here with Crypto Common Sense, and I wanted to sit down this Friday afternoon and shoot an update video on Bitcoin and walk through some potential future scenarios. I've been saying the last couple of days that I was short-term bullish, that I was looking for some type of bear trap. It's kind of what my suspicion was, and we did see that over the last 24 hours. So I'll talk about that and kind of what I expect going forward. So first things first, I'm going to start on a chart that's not crypto, but it's important to understand what's going on. When I first started trading crypto in 2017, I didn't look at anything except crypto charts. And so a lot of times I was trading in the dark. For example, when 2018's bear market kicked off, had I been trading stocks also, I would have realized, okay, this is a wider issue than just cryptocurrency. For example, if we look at this chart here, this was this is a future chart, so it's not going to go back far enough. Bear with me. We'll look at the QQQ chart. This was 2018 right through here, right? So the market, it kind of went sideways, and then at the end of the year in September, it actually dumped all the way through December, which was when Bitcoin itself actually puked down. If you were in Bitcoin, you'll remember what was happening. Bitcoin had been consolidating for several months. It looked like there might have been a $5,000 or $6,000 potential bottom on it. A lot of people were calling for that. I was naively calling for a $3,200 bottom. I say naively, even though it came true. I thought it would hit that by November. So I was actually spot on, but it was a little bit naive because I was ignoring the stock market. I was just looking at crypto. And so had the stock market not puked down, crypto probably wouldn't have puked down either. We have to look at these, stock charts to really get an idea of what Bitcoin may be doing. And, for example, the last few months, Bitcoin has been ranging. And then it's like, well, why is Bitcoin ranging? It's very strange for it to range this long in the middle of its bull cycle. But then you look over at a chart of the QQQ, and I'm going to go back to the futures chart because that's what I like to look at. Look at what the NASDAQ futures and the NASDAQ has been doing the last couple of months. It has also been ranging. It essentially entered into this range area back in November of 2024. So the last 3 months, we've been going sideways on the broader tech market, which suddenly makes sense why Bitcoin has also been going sideways these last 3 months. It's not a coincidence, right? November through now, sideways price action on Bitcoin, just like there's sideways price action on the NASDAQ. So the NASDAQ came through, it finished dumping. A lot of times people don't understand this. They think ranges are hard to trade. Ranges are one of the easiest things in the world to trade. If it's a true range, it is very common for them to basically ricochet between the top of the range and the bottom of the range. And oftentimes they don't fool around. They go there hard and fast, which is what we saw, right? This is, it came up near the top of the range and then just completely puked down. This is a huge move on the stock market, right? We're talking about a dump of over 8% in roughly a week. That's a big move in stocks. So then you take that in context and you look at Bitcoin, it's like, oh, suddenly it makes sense why Bitcoin in that same time frame dumped 21%. Now, side note for all you Kool-Aid drinkers out there who are still saying, but Bitcoin is a store of value, James. No, it's not. Do you see what happens when the NASDAQ pukes? Bitcoin pukes harder, all right? NASDAQ drops 8% in the last roughly 8 days. Bitcoin decides, oh, hold my beer, and drops 21%. It is a speculative asset that is highly correlated to the NASDAQ. It's essentially almost like trading a leveraged ETF of the NASDAQ. That's kind of what Bitcoin is like, okay? It's like you're trading a leveraged ETF. So that being said, now we've got some interesting things to consider. First of all, this could be a range expansion, which is the same thing I talked about on Bitcoin a few days ago. It could be that this was just simply, coming out of the bottom of the range, maybe trying to test these lows back here, in which case it may rocket right back to the top of this range. But the other thing we do have to consider, because if we look at a monthly chart, it's a much less rosy picture. We had this green candle, which was basically like a shooting star type of candlestick, followed by roughly, a spinning top. And this candle took out this candle's low. On a monthly candlestick, we really don't like to see lows taken out. If you look at an uptrend on the NASDAQ, you'll see that it's not really very common that a monthly low is taken out. Typically, the candles will just continue up. Once in a while, like here, there's a little bit of indecision and we barely took out this low, but that was after like a 30% move down. That was after this bear market of 2022, right? And a bull market, we typically don't see a whole lot of lows being taken out. Again, it does happen. For example, look right through here. Okay, back in 2021, it happened. But you also have to remember what was happening back here. We had a whole lot of quantitative easing happening. The money, the government itself was really trying to push those stocks up and prop up the economy. We're not in the same environment right now. We're not looking at interest rates that are falling. We're looking at basically stationary interest rates. And so it is a little bit concerning to me. It looks a little bit more like what was happening back here, right? This candlestick paused, this took out its low, tried to pause again. Bulls just couldn't pull it off. And then we got that 30% roughly move down on the NASDAQ. Again, all this is important because Bitcoin is correlated, all right? And this 37% move down on the NASDAQ, Bitcoin dumped almost 80%. That's kind of what, when I see a chart, that's what I'm thinking of. Let's look at Bitcoin real quick. Here's some things about Bitcoin you need to be aware of. So again, follows the NASDAQ, obviously, but the other thing you need to be aware of is, yes, I hypothesized this could have been a false breakdown, a bear trap to move back up. It didn't happen. And then I hypothesized that it could be coming down to this level, and same thing, maybe some type of bear trap where it moves back up to this level, and then we'd see. I think it's very, very important to be cautious on Bitcoin right now because our 50 moving average has not just flattened, it is now moving down. That is not a good sign, A, okay? But B, we've broke below not just this range up top, but also this swing low back here, this pullback low back here, depending on what time frame you're looking at. If you're on a smaller time frame, this would be a swing here. And the reason this is kind of concerning to me is because this suddenly looks a whole lot like Wyckoff to me. Like this was a markup phase, like this was distribution, and like this is the initial breakdown that's going to have one of these. And this is going to be our last point of supply before it has one of these. Now, if this is a smaller, just a multi-month kind of range through this, or cycle, if you will, a multi-month cycle, just, basically from October until now, it could be that the markdown stops right around this range back here, back in these, prior demand zones. That wouldn't be all that bad, right? It would be kind of par for the course for a typical bull cycle, just basically a rough correction, in which case we could still, look for some potential upside toward new all-time highs. But there is one possibility that I think is less likely, but still potentially possible. And so I wanted to make you aware of it because it's always good to have your eye on the big picture. And this one's going to be much less fun to talk about, but sometimes that's the way it goes. So this was a chart that I had originally posted up. This first idea came up. It's a monthly chart, first of all. I'm going to put it on log. It's on log. I'm going to zoom out a bit. This idea first came around back in probably 2021, not this exact idea. But I started to get this idea that we were actually in macro. Actually, I think it even came in before that. I think I initially was thinking even like back here. Like not in 2018, but like when we were in 2020, I was wondering if maybe this was macro distribution. What I mean by macro distribution is I kind of started to hypothesize that this was one cycle, like one super cycle on Bitcoin. And that as we started to flatten out near the top, that we could actually be looking at some type of distribution phase. It's still very possible. I'm going to zoom in and explain why. So if you look at a schematic, and schematics are just general guidelines, right? This is a distribution schematic based off of Richard Wyckoff's work, roughly 100 years ago. He came up with these schematics. If this was indeed, a buying climax back here in November 21, which makes sense because it was the all-time high up to that point, and if this was indeed, our signs of weakness, which is what SAL stands for, retesting these old highs, then it is potentially possible that what's happening right now, especially given the fact that it's ranging, is actually a UTAB, which stands for up thrust after distribution. Basically, it's the last point to get out of the market before it enters its markdown phase. And if it starts to drop from here, it's very, very important that we recognize that there's a small possibility that this is going to enter into a markdown phase, which would be phase D of our market. And if we're talking about a macro cycle, we could be seeing sub $10,000 Bitcoin, which again, I've said in previous videos, I think it's highly unlikely. Okay. So this is not a scare video. I think this is highly unlikely, but it is potentially possible. And I think the only way this happens is if we get a true bear market in equities. For example, the NASDAQ fell 83% in the dot-com bubble. See this? This bear market that a lot of younger people experienced in 2022, they think that's a bad bear market in stocks, 35%. No, that's not a bad bear market in stocks. This is a bad bear market in stocks. That move was 83.6%. So if the NASDAQ fell 83%, let's say that the AI bubble popped or for whatever reason, something, hopefully not, but some kind of major world conflict or whatever, something, a catalyst set this off and it fell 83%. I think that's when Bitcoin could potentially have a 90+% drop. Okay. And again, this is marked down and we start talking about going back to these phases before this, pump. I don't think we're going to go down, obviously, in these areas under $1 or anything. I don't even think we go back to $1,000. I think if this was distribution and this does end up being some kind of macro distribution type of cycle, we'd probably be looking at, potentially maybe, I guess maybe $1,000 wouldn't be completely off the table, like back to these old all-time highs. I think it would be awful far-fetched to see it drop below these 2018 lows. And this is like a very, very small chance to begin with. And then even smaller chance it takes out these lows back here. All right. So it's kind of like a 1% chance. Like we'll say 1%. Okay. Something tiny. But realistically, if we just look at this and say that Bitcoin tends to overreact to the NASDAQ, if the NASDAQ fell 83% from its highs, and Bitcoin fell the exact same amount, which would be 83%, that would put it down around 17,000. If it overreacts, let's say it fell 90%, put it down around 10. Let's say it really got silly, it'd have to fall 97% to hit those 2018 lows. So you better believe that even somebody that's not overly eager about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, if Bitcoin fell to $3,000, I would buy some Bitcoin. Now, I wouldn't go all in on it. I wouldn't use bad risk management where I was risking, half my net worth or something crazy. But would I be willing to take, a risk of maybe 2 or 3% of my net worth? Absolutely. 5%? At that price? Probably. Yeah, probably so. Because one thing I will tell you guys, and I know this is, kind of a what if anyway, but one thing I'll tell you guys is you have to be very careful about your mindset with trading and with investing. Don't let the two bleed over into each other, because this is one of the huge mistakes that I made in 2020. I had orders in the books to buy Bitcoin back, a lot of Bitcoin at $4,000 because I believed it would fall back to this level. I've been waiting for it since August of 2019. But when it got there was a lot of anxiety. Obviously, there was COVID going on, but there was also one person in particular who I thought was a really legit trader and found out later they weren't. And they were whispering in my ear that they thought it was potentially going to zero, which just kind of was confirmation bias for me being scared already. And so I pulled my orders. Okay. But I never should have pulled the orders because they were investments, not trades. And the chances of going to zero were very, very small. And even if I was, wrong on the idea at the time when I came up with this plan, even if I was wrong that Bitcoin was actually going to go to new all-time highs, you don't have to be right about going way, way up. Let's say that I was wrong about 4,000. Let's say that I had bought that, and let's say Bitcoin fell all the way to $1,000 that day. I would have been down 75% on the investment, which is bad. But if it wasn't a trade, there's no stop loss. So all I really had to say to myself was, do I think Bitcoin will be worth more in the future than it's worth today? As a trader, you have to say, do I think Bitcoin will be worth more in the near future and not go down very much further than it's already went down? Because if so, you get stopped out. But as an investor, you don't care if it goes down further. It can go down further as long as eventually it goes back up. And the probability is that Bitcoin is going to stay under $4,000 were probably 1 in 1,000, right? There's probably a 1 in 1,000 chance that was actually going to stay under 4 grand. So I absolutely should have left my orders on the book, let it fill, and if it went down further, maybe even consider buying more. But instead I pulled the orders, and that was a 7-figure mistake. Like, no exaggeration. I literally cost myself 7 figures not letting, like, I canceled the order the day that it happened. Like, it was like at 48 or 4,700 bucks, and I yanked the order that had been sitting there since August of the prior year. Bad mistake. I also had an Ethereum order that was sitting at 88 bucks, and when Ethereum hit 90 bucks, I refused to move it $2, and it didn't fill. Again, now Ethereum is 2,000 or 3,000 bucks, so huge mistakes. All right. So make sure you don't mix the two. Like, trading is trading. You have stop losses, and yes, you have to be spot on with your timing. Investing is investing. All you have to do in investing is buy something that eventually is worth more than you paid for it. And that's a whole lot easier to do. So again, I know I said it several times, but I'm going to say it again so nobody freaks out. I think this is a very, very, very unlikely scenario, but it is a possible scenario, and it really only becomes possible in my mind if we go into a serious, bear market on tech stocks, talking 75, 80% drop in that market, which, by the way, just going back to an NDX chart to show you, also unlikely over here. But if it did happen, it would be repeating the the .com bubble, right? And it would put the NASDAQ down around, from its all-time high, it would have to drop to about 3,800 points, which in theory would be retesting these highs back here, which is not completely absurd, just highly unlikely. So in the short term, pay attention to what Bitcoin does when it gets back. If it gets back up to this level, pay close attention to what it does, right? If it gets this level and starts stalling out, it's really giving us hints that this may be at least a multi-month markdown where it does something like this. It goes back down to these levels. If it can break back to this level, there's a very good possibility that it's going to, at the very least, go back and test the range highs. So I'll wrap the video up there. Please remember that I am some guy sitting in a spare bedroom, which means that nothing in the video is financial advice, and you should always go out and do your own due diligence and seek out professional financial advice from a licensed financial advisor for making any type of investment in cryptocurrency, the stock market, precious metals, Forex, or any other tradable asset. This is James with Crypto Common Sense, reminding you to please trade safe and make sure to stop now and give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.